This is eTurbo News in Honolulu with our daily breaking news show. Please stay tuned.
Welcome from Nepal. We have with us in the studio today Robin Bousted. He's a researcher with a particular emphasis on the tourism industry. He's also the founder of the Great Himalayan Trail, and he recently conducted some interesting research on something he calls regenerative tourism and the impacts of tourism in places like the High Himalaya Range. Welcome to our studio.
Scott, pleasure.
So tell me a little bit about yourself.
Okay, I don't think we have enough time to go through all of it, so I'll try and just pick out the bits I like most. I fell in love with the Himalaya 30 years ago, and I've been here as regularly as I possibly can be, to the point of now living here, being based here for the last 15, 16 years. I started off in tourism, but I also work in agriculture and ICT, information technology. And all of what I try to do has a sustainable kick to it somewhere. It's something that I was always interested in as a kid. I went off and worked for Greenpeace International for 4 years as a volunteer after university. And that's always been something that I felt was an important aspect of how we should be trying to live as well as we can on this planet.
Great. And I know, what caught my attention, and the reason I wanted to have you here today, sometime back on social media, you posted this trailer for a video. And it was the trailer was all about research you were doing with people in villages living up in the high Himalayan area. And what struck me was at the end of the video, you're talking about how you would expect, with the increase in tourism and the increase in money and improved economy in some of these areas, that people would be feeling happy, people would be feeling very good about it. But the final words of your video are kind of chilling, or of the trailer, because they say, but that's not what they say. And that really grabbed my attention. Because I think there's a built-in assumption that if tourism comes to a community that didn't have it, that suddenly there's going to be wealth and money flowing to the community, and that should automatically improve things for everybody. But this isn't what your research is finding out, is it?
To ask communities to really try and identify how they would like to have a relationship with tourism. Walking adventure tourism here, we're going to be doing surveys.
Feel about the impact of tourism on their lives and their communities and their culture. That's been positive, that it's been consistent, but what they're saying is not.
I'm kind of surprised that people are surprised that it isn't working out the way that they thought it was working out. I mean, tourism is essentially, for most of the world, an extractive industry. It goes to locations and it takes out from that location what it can to provide happiness, satisfaction, enjoyment, whatever it is, to visitors. And it does it in an exploitative way, in that you will use the natural resources or the human resources of the destination in a way to make the most amount of money. That's not necessarily for the locals, it's for the business operator that's handling the clients. So directly you start thinking about what's actually happening with tourism, it shouldn't be a surprise that actually it doesn't work as well in practice as we would like to think it does. But tourism does a very good job of selling itself as being a good news pastime. It's your holiday. You don't want to think that your holiday isn't good news for somebody else. And that really was the question we were trying to ask. Is there a way of trying to work out if your holiday is good news for the locals? And that isn't just Are you making a bit of money? Can you send your kids to school? Can you buy this? Can you do that? It's to look at the whole system and ask, is it actually working better for you doing this, or is it causing problems? And in somewhere like the Solukhumbu, the Everest region of Nepal, that has 7,000, just over 7,000 residents and up to 60,000 visitors a year, you have all of the classic scenarios of what you might call over-tourism and exploitative tourism. So it was an obvious place to go and ask this question, and that meant that we needed to have a very solid, robust framework to ask it. So that was the premise, that was the idea. Then I went and had a look at what people are doing in the world of social impacts of tourism, and it's all over the place. There are multiple theories, there are multiple papers written that you need to do it this way or that way, and this way is the wrong way, and I couldn't help feeling that it was almost like a dance of shadows. No one really wanted to get to grips with the social impacts of tourism. So I spent 2020 doing exactly that, going through all of the research that's been done around the world over the last 20, 30 years, put it all together, realized that there are in fact some commonalities, there's some common threads, there are some things that are a bit out there as well, but how to put it all together into a system that you could have a social worker go into a community with a inquiring, questioning technique, okay, and rather than participatory questioning, which is just you ask a question and I respond, it uses emancipatory questioning. So the idea is that by answering the question, you work out something in your answer that's going to help change your day tomorrow. So emancipatory questioning with a social worker and a very strong theoretical framework. We took this up to the Khumbu and we spent 3 weeks walking around, talking to pretty well every community. We ended up talking to more than 40% of the population, which is by far the largest survey that's happened in the Khumbu for social impacts. And it was surprising that what we were being told was so consistent, but what we were being told was deeply concerning. And what came out of the answers was that the social impact of tourism, and again, I don't think we should really be surprised that people see that their lives are intrinsically linked to the environment that they live in. So if you are going to negatively affect the world that somebody lives in or the space that they live in, then you're going to be affecting their social world as well. And that was really quite profound in the minds of the people who live in the Khumbu. They now do not have any access to a pure water source. Every water source in the Khumbu is contaminated with animal or, more likely, human feces. Now, I don't think that anyone in the world would consider that a good thing. And certainly the people who live in the Khumbu definitely don't think that's a good thing. They look at their culture as being resilient and needing to be resilient to be able to cope with the impact of tourism. But the migration of younger generations outside of the Khumbu has now meant that there is a big disconnect between the older community members and the younger ones who now live in the States or in Europe or somewhere else. And the older people who are left are now deeply concerned. What happens when I die? Who is going to look after my body? Who is going to look after my home? Who is going to be caring for the family concerned and our ancestors? Because they're all gone. Then you also have the economic impacts, which, although superficially good, yes, they do make people's lives easier. But those economic impacts are bringing Sherpas into the community. They're attracting people who are not of the same ethnic group, and it's diluting the traditional Sherpa way of life in the Sherpa heartland. And they're very concerned about that as well. To the point where now you walk into communities, there will be a Sherpa mothers group and a non-Sherpa mothers group, and they refuse to interact. There is some very difficult situations in communities because of this social transformation. The social impacts of tourism directly impact daily lives, are directly changing the environment, and no one is recognizing them for what they are. The locals want to do something about it, but they don't know what to do. They don't feel empowered. They don't feel that they can take control of their lives and their natural environment. And I came away from the whole experience realizing that actually this isn't just the Solukhumbu. This is tourism everywhere. Because the problems that the Sherpas are talking about in the Everest region are exactly the same problems as the people in Barcelona are talking about, or the people in Venice are talking about. And it's the impact on their quality of life, on their daily routines, on access to be able to spend time doing things that's in their neighbourhood in the way that they want to be able to do things. They want to be able to have access to natural resources that's reliable and on the terms that are equitable for the community. So then I began to realise that this social impact of tourism is actually pretty well the same everywhere. The scale of it may vary, absolutely, but the issues that people are talking about are pretty much the same everywhere on planet Earth. And that, I think, was the biggest outcome from my perspective, that it is possible to look at tourism, identify the problems, quantify those problems, come up with mechanisms where communities, governments, and companies can try to manage those problems and mitigate them. But you need to have a will to do so. You need to be willing to open your eyes and your ears and listen to people. And if you're not prepared to do that, then you're going to have some serious problems with tourism.
I want to talk a little bit more about that, because you and I talked a little bit off camera about a process or a theory, I'm not sure what the proper term is for it, for something you call regenerative tourism. Can you tell me a little bit about that concept, how it might work?
Sure. The idea of regenerative tourism has actually been around quite a long time. And there are some people in the world who have been at the forefront of trying to get a conversation about tourism to move beyond this net negative, which is what most of the tourism industry is, exploitative, very commercially focused, just going into communities and extracting whatever you can without really any thought or regard for consequence. So to take that net negative situation and turn it into first base would be net zero, which is what sustainable tourism is trying to achieve. And then there is this obvious, well, if we can go from net negative to net zero, maybe we can take it to a net positive. And that's what regenerative tourism is trying to do. So a lot of sustainable tourism is focused on sort of the physical footprints, the carbon footprints, the product footprints, plastic, transportation systems. How can you develop itineraries and activities that are going to be of some benefit but have the minimum impact? That's what sustainable tourism is trying to achieve. Regenerative tourism takes that conversation and says, okay, maybe we should be co-creating the product with the communities or with the National Park Management System and working out how best you can create a relationship between tourists, tourism companies and communities to everyone come out of it better off. Not just financially, but the environment is better off. perhaps let's use an example. One of the, I think, one of the most extractive and exploitative forms of tourism is in fact mountaineering, where there is nothing but impact for the mountain and there is very little positive impact for the communities. Nearly all mountaineers will fly in and out of a location in Nepal by a helicopter. They spend almost no time with the residents around the mountain. The staff, the local staff, are there simply to help them get to the top of the mountain under almost any cost. And that can be cost of life, let alone just financial. So here's a bunch of people that in theory you would think the mountaineers would care about the natural world and would care about national parks and access to the great outdoors and the opportunity to further the sense of human spirit and getting to the top of mountains. But the actual reality is that it's driving an industry that just leaves rubbish all over the place and hasn't really contributed anything to the communities other than some financial payoff. So how could we take mountaineering to become a net positive? Well, I think this is the journey that the Sherpas and the people who work on the mountain are now trying to go down. They're trying to take ownership of their own natural asset, which is a great start. And every community that has tourism should begin by doing exactly that. Create a charter, create some form of communal agreement about how you want to have a relationship with tourism. And I think that the Sherpas on climbing Mount Everest should be the very first ones to sit down and say, this is how we want to have a relationship with mountaineering. It's in our best interest. We don't want to die. We want to be safe. We want to be paid well. We want to come back and spend time with our families after the season without frostbite and without problems. So I think that's a great stepping stone to become regenerative. You first have to have that local dialogue. And with that dialogue, you're going to start identifying issues, problems, potential solutions, and a pathway forward. To what extent you can facilitate that, well, that depends on political will. Because any community can actually take control of its own resources. Do they feel empowered to do so? Do they have the resources to do so? That is very, very much a case by case, often driven by perhaps a strong personality in a village or in a community who wants to do it, where in other places they don't have that strong personality. And there is always this issue of ethics and equity within communities anyway. So you really do need to see the government or tourism boards to take a more guiding, more proactive guiding role to be able to get towards regeneration. Because if you want this net positive, if you want everyone that's involved in tourism to be benefiting and contributing in a positive way to the outcome of what tourism is, you do need to have some rules and regulations. You do need to have some way of saying this is acceptable and this is not acceptable. And for something like mountaineering, I think that's happening. I think that we're going to go down that path, and I think that it's going to be a very difficult path over the next 5 to 10 years for the mountaineering industry to be able to get its head out of the sand and start seeing the world for what it really is. And hopefully we'll end up with a more positive, more productive industry at the end of the day.
When you were going through these villages, I know a lot of people told you problems they were experiencing as a result of the impact of tourism. Were people coming up also with solutions? Did they have local community ideas about how they might go about solving some of these problems?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the point of emancipatory action research. So when you go and do a survey, you ask a whole bunch of questions. You hope those questions are relevant and poignant and starts the juices flowing. Hey, oh yeah, look, we haven't talked about this, and that's an issue. And actually the interviews, especially the group interviews, would become very emotional. there was a lot of bottled up anxiety and frustration inside of people. That could be inter-community, intra-community, just within individuals. So in going through the process of asking the questions, you're already bringing out the opportunity to confront challenges that lie in front of people. And maybe they feel that they do not have the resources or they do not have the opportunity to be able to confront that opportunity. But by raising it together, then somebody else might say, well, I feel like that as well, and I think this, and I think that. And the conversation actually begins about the different perspectives looking at that problem and the potential solutions. So at the end of the survey, we would say, okay, please can you, as a community, identify as many major problems as you can. Maybe it's 1, maybe it's 3, maybe it's 10. Can you go through and just identify them? Now, can we prioritize the 3 most important? Can you decide between you which ones you think are the most important? And do you have any ideas about how you could go about dealing with these problems? And every single time, every single problem, there would be a potential pathway to a solution that the community would come together on. There is strength in numbers, there is confidence in numbers, and most of the time people don't come up with solutions because they feel isolated. They feel that they're the only ones that see the problem for what it is, and that therefore they don't have the resources or they don't have the courage to be able to tackle that problem themselves. When you bring the community together and they discuss it openly, they realise that everyone else actually sees the same problem, and that there are ideas for being able to do something about solving that problem. So yeah, emancipatory action research, I'm very much a big fan of it. I think it's a little bit ludicrous to go into communities with a bunch of questions and just get your answers and then turn around and walk away and having had no further impact within that community than just some participation. But that's been the modality for most social impact survey research over the last 30 years. So I really don't think that there has been any case of using emancipatory action research in social impacts of tourism before. I think we were the first ones to do it. And I would love to see more people doing it, really. It's such a powerful exercise.
And that provides a good segue for me into the fact that in addition to doing researching and going out to communities and conducting this kind of research, you also work with companies and tourist organizations and governments, perhaps, in coming up with ways to design effective research tools, and then from those effective research tools begin to create a regenerative model of tourism to head down that path. Where can people find out more about that?
Okay, well, the social impact of tourism is all online. It's all available through the Great Himalaya Trail website.
Can I get you to give that URL real quick?
GreatHimalayaTrail.com.
Great Himalayan Trail.
No, Great Himalaya.
Himalaya.
It's not of the Himalaya, it is the Himalaya.
Trail.com.
GreatHimalayaTrail.com.
Okay.
There are a number of, there's a new research paper coming out this year on the impacts of tourism and climate change in the Sagarmatha National Park. And I have another paper coming out towards the end of this year, which is the impacts on heritage of tourism and climate change in the Sagarmatha National Park. Now, all of these basically interlink around the same issues within communities. That's the social impact stuff. I also am working on a new carbon footprinting offsetting systems. Now, before we talked a little bit about how in some areas of tourism, especially in areas like mountaineering, there is a socio-economic system that doesn't really benefit locals a great deal. Well, carbon offsetting is exactly the same. It is another example of almost economic colonialism, where the current offsetting trading platforms and trading system is really designed to serve the interests of big business in the West and is not in any way trying to serve the interests of small business in what you might want to call the global south or in poorer countries. So the carbon footprinting, waste footprinting and water footprinting system I am trying to link with offsetting programs within countries that would not necessarily be accessible to international businesses. They would be domestic market trading platforms and directly related to the footprints that are established within a country. So all of that's in process this year. The carbon footprinting is being done with an organisation called Travel Life and Karmacal. We're trying to get people like Skyscanner and Booking.com to engage with it as well, so we have something which is a really easy to use, intuitive system. And the offsetting programs will basically have to be negotiations with each government. And in fact, one of the first governments that we're talking to about this is Thailand. The Thais have taken a very proactive approach to wanting to calculate footprints and offset them within country. And perhaps that new normal that everybody talks about is a possibility, but we still have a long way to go.
Great. I want to thank you so much for being here today. You're fascinating to listen to. I could probably sit here for hours, but at some point I have to stop recording to make a video. And I think your contribution to understanding what some of the issues of tourism are and finding ways to begin to go down the path of change for that is to be applauded. It's fantastic. I hope you all have enjoyed our time here today, and namaste from Nepal from both of us.
Thank you, Scott.
From Nepal to Ukraine, our Scream.travel campaign in cooperation with eTurbo News and the World Tourism Network is strong. Ivan Liptuva, our partner in Odessa, Ukraine, is sending these pictures from his backyard. These are the first attack by the Russian aggressor on his home city, Odessa.
Да уж, вот там вот порт. Короче, жопа, мы видели 4 ракеты, как только что прилетело.